Howdy folks, I'm Eston Walton and today we're here for another audiobook review. And so today's book is Bones of the Past by Drew Hayes and the narrator is Amy Landon. So, overall the book got a pretty good review, or a pretty good rating, 4.16. The book side itself did pretty great, 4.5. The narrator pulled it down a little bit. The narration portion got a 3.5, and let's go over the different categories. So to start off with uniqueness. So this is on the book side of things. This book I would classify as a very unique book. The reason is that it comes from the villain's perspective. The genre of this book series is in the superhero category, and so having a book that's from the villain's perspective brings a little bit of uniqueness to it. In addition to that, the author has a lot of superpowers that are unique to the series as well. And so the only downside is, being a superhero book, you get a lot of the same super speed, super strength. The author tries to offset that by giving some unique descriptions as to how they got their powers, backstories, and stuff like that. But having a book that is from the villain's perspective in a world in which you have a very powerful superhero is challenging. And so I gave it a 4.5 out of 5 for uniqueness. Then on to character development. Where the first book in this series was all about character development, becoming better, faster, stronger, understanding powers. This book, I feel like, pulled back from that a little bit. The goal of this book was more world building, more understanding of like the different systems that are going on. And so the main character does get a little bit stronger. She does grow less flat, so she has to have some more defining questions that she has to answer. But in general, not a huge amount of growth. I gave it a 4 out of 5 in this category, and I probably would have given a little bit lower, but we saw a lot of other characters grow in this series, in this particular book. Couple heroes, couple villains, all became a little bit more interesting, and that, in my mind, helped bring up the book some. It did cause some issues though. So moving on to secondary characters, I gave it a 4.5 out of 5. If you read the book, you may kind of question that, because there are a ton of secondary characters and they are very important to the story. They help expand the magic system. They provide conflict. You get to see how the world is put together, and like they have their own plots, each of these different side characters. The problem is that I felt like we spent a little bit too much time on them. There was a couple of different scenes that I felt like, I didn't really need to know that happened. I don't think that really contributed to the enjoyment of the book. And there weren't any like really big like wow scenes. There were a rare few couple of wow scenes from the secondary characters' perspectives. And so I didn't talk it a lot because, it's hard enough to write like good secondary characters, and he does a great job. So I only docked it a half point just because I felt like it was a little excessive. Then on to the magic system, which I gave him a 5 for this. In this book, we didn't learn any more per se about the main character, which is, not super great as far as their superpower and what she can do. But we had like a whole new group of superheroes that were added to the mix, and we got to learn about how their powers work, some limitations to them. Some of it's been left still, to learn about, which is fun. And some of our old favorites, we dove a little bit deeper into their powers and saw them grow. And so all of that kind of helped the magic system grow as a whole. And in addition to that, we got to see a little bit of behind the scenes. One of the main characters in the series, I don't want to ruin too much, but one of the main characters in the series has a really good foundational knowledge of how everything started. And so we got to see from his perspective a couple of times. And that came up, quite a bit in the storyline. And so it gave us the ability to see a little deeper into why powers work the way they work, where their powers come from, and I think that there's a lot more to come, on that front. And so once again, I gave it a 5 out of 5 for the magic system. Next we have the narration portion of it. So to start with, dynamic voicing. And just as a reminder, dynamic voicing is what I'm grading on is, can you feel emotion? Is there a good tone in the narration? Do you have to be told that the character is surprised, or could you have figured it out? And so on that, I gave the narration for dynamic voicing a 3 out of 5. The reason for that is that I had a very hard time telling if the main character was excited, was happy. The further I got into the book, which this is like a 30-hour plus book, I eventually could start to pick up on hints of characters being serious through like volume changes. But I feel like that's one place that the narrator lacked, was the ability to provide really strong expressions to the characters. And then vocal cast was a little bit better. I gave her a 4 out of 5 for that category, which vocal cast is the ability to really make each character distinctive. So, most narrators have a good voice for the main character, but what about everyone else? They're part of the book too. And so I came from a book previously to this one where the narrator was very expressive, very distinct in their vocal cast. And so it actually took me a little bit in this book to realize and find the distinctions. The author or the narrator made me work for it a little bit. But about halfway through, I realized that I could tell the difference in between the main character and her friends and her enemies, and that there was, a different tone used for each of those characters. And so shouldn't have taken me halfway through the book to really get that. I blame part of that on, coming off of a book with a more expressive narrator. So I didn't give a horrible rating, but I did drop the score down to 4 out of 5. And so now on to like the extra pieces of information I provide. One thing I normally don't provide, but I feel like I should, is how engaged I was in this book. And that was kind of the disappointing part of this book, was the characters are great, the story is great, and I'm not sure why I felt this way, but I was easily distracted on this book. I was much more likely to pull up like a podcast or something than continue on with this book, and it took me longer than I expected to get it done. And I think a lot of that has to do with how much of a distraction we had from the main character. When I'm listening to a book, I really like to see the main character grow and struggle. And we saw some struggle, but there weren't any big wow moments that kept me coming back, that kept me being pulled into the storyline. And so I feel like this book didn't really have as good of a wow factor as you would see that keeps you coming back. And so it's a good book, but I feel like its engagement was a little bit on the lower side. And I don't have a scale for that yet. So right now that's just a very subjective category. When it comes to age rating, I definitely would recommend upper high school, or maybe even, out of high school starting. For one, coming from a villain's perspective is kind of an adult category for me. I feel like it takes a little bit of maturity to be able to see that perspective and enjoy it. In addition to that, there is strong use of language, and some scenes that are described to kind of a gory-ish tint, and you probably don't need to have access to that in middle school. Definitely not elementary school, right? So like upper high school and beyond, I definitely think a parent should have final say on that, because every parent wants to raise their kid differently, and different kids are at different maturity levels. So as far as humor goes, I would say it balances humor and seriousness. There are some funny parts, there are some very serious parts. It doesn't tilt one way or the other. For romance, there are some chaste romances, and what I mean by that is there's some obvious people who want romantic situations, but nothing gets fully engaged. It does make you feel like in the future there might be some romantic options, but not a ton of it in this book. As far as action goes, it's a superhero book. Of course, there's action all the time. And gore, stronger than what I have in most of the books, but it's not like a gory book. It's not coming around every turn. It's used to provide emphasis. It kind of, when it's used to show like the depravity of the human that's doing it. When it's not necessary, then it's not really involved. And so that's the book. In summary, overall 4.16 in that ballpark. The book itself is 4.5. I love pretty much everything that Drew Hayes has to put out. Narrator 3.5. Amy Landon, she does good. She has good speaking quality. Like, it's not like she stumbles over her words or anything. Everything is pretty decent. There's just a couple of things we look for to really make a narrator stand apart, and to make the book come alive. And I feel like she has some room to grow there. And so that kind of drops the overall rating. But we're grading audiobooks. So if you don't include the narrator, then you're just grading a book. And so either way, thank you for watching. Like and subscribe. And I appreciate every comment you have. If you ever have any ideas about different things I should be rating, or if I rated things differently than what you would expect, drop it in the comment. I am not new to listening to books. I am new to grading them. And so, I have some stuff to learn too. Either way, thank you so much. Have a good day.